I gave my daughter my late wife's diamond necklace during her wedding toast, but her husband smirked and said, "Is that from a pawn shop?" She just looked away. So I picked up my coat and started the collapse. The ballroom glittered with light, but in my hand, I held the one thing that carried more weight than gold, my late wife's necklace. The chain was cool against my palm, each diamond a spark of memory. Margaret had worn it at her last anniversary dinner before the illness claimed her. I had saved it for years, waiting for the moment I could place it around Emily's neck, as if in that act my wife's love would pass from mother to daughter. I had imagined this night as one of joy, the kind of story that would echo through our family for generations. Instead, I felt the edges of foreboding, a whisper that not all eyes in the room looked kindly on me. The chapter's purpose was clear to me even then, though I could not name it at the time. This was to be the night where I honored Margaret's memory, proved to Emily that her father's sacrifices had never been in vain. Yet it would also be the night I realized that the people I loved most could wound me deeper than any stranger. The ballroom on Manhattan's Upper East Side was alive with sound and motion. Chandeliers sparkled overhead like constellations. The polished marble floor reflected swirls of gowns and tuxedos. A quartet played near the dais, their strings weaving through the laughter and clinking glasses. Waiters in crisp black uniforms carried trays of champagne. The scent of roses from towering floral arrangements mixed with the faint aroma of filet mignon being served at the back tables. For all its grandeur, the place felt to me like a stage where I had a part to play. I stood at the head table, clearing my throat, and the hum of conversation lowered to a respectful hush. Faces turned toward me, bankers I had known for decades, family friends from Brooklyn, colleagues from Wall Street, who remembered the long hours I had traded for deals. My hand went to my pocket where the velvet box rested, heavier than it looked. "Tonight," I began, steadying my voice, though my chest tightened, "we celebrate Emily and Trevor." I turned to my daughter. She sat radiant in her ivory dress, her cheeks touched with a glow that should have been happiness. "Emily, my pride, my joy, this is for you." I opened the box and lifted the necklace. Light scattered across the diamonds, drawing a small gasp from those nearby. For a heartbeat, I felt the world had paused, holding its breath for me. "It was your mother's," I said, the words catching in my throat. "Her love is now yours." Gasps turned to soft murmurs of admiration. Eyes shimmered as if touched by my sincerity. I stepped forward, ready to fasten the chain at Emily's neck. But then Trevor leaned forward, his lips curved in a smirk that sliced through the moment. "What's this, Henry?" His voice was pitched to Carrie, mocking. "Some cheap trinket from a pawn shop?" The words hit like a slap. A ripple of laughter followed, quickly stifled but still audible. My hand faltered, the necklace trembling between my fingers. I looked at Emily, waiting, praying that she would defend her father, the gift, and her mother's memory. Her eyes dropped to the tablecloth. Her fingers twisted the napkin, but no words came. The silence between us was louder than Trevor's insult. Trevor reached out, his hand brushing the velvet box as if dismissing it from existence. The box tipped and fell, landing on the table with a dull sound. The necklace spilled across the linen, diamonds scattering like tears. "Really, Henry?" Trevor said, his tone thick with contempt. "You could have at least sprung for something new." This time the laughter was harsher, freer. I felt heat surge to my face, not from shame but from a rage that had been dormant for years. I had prepared a speech about the penthouse apartment in Midtown, a gift I had quietly purchased as a surprise for Emily and Trevor. I had imagined their faces when I revealed it, the applause of the guests, the pride of knowing my daughter would live in comfort. But Trevor's sneer killed that moment before it could be born. I drew myself upright, forcing my mouth into a smile that hid everything. "Enjoy the evening," I said, calm, composed. My voice betrayed nothing of the storm inside. I turned and walked away, each step echoing on the marble floor. I felt stares on my back, whispers curling like smoke behind me. The heavy doors of the ballroom opened to the Manhattan night, and the chill air struck me like cold steel. Outside, the city pulsed. Neon signs flickered, taxis honked, steam rose from vents in the pavement, but I felt none of it. Inside my chest, something had shifted. I drove through the city streets, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. My wife's necklace was not just a gift. It was her heart, her love distilled into something tangible. And Emily had let it be mocked, discarded, without a word of defense. That betrayal cut deeper than Trevor's arrogance. By the time I reached my old house in Brooklyn, my resolve had begun to form. The house welcomed me with its familiar creaks, the scent of aged wood, the faint ghost of coffee long past. I sat in my leather armchair, the one Margaret used to curl into with a book. A lamp cast a pool of light around me. I tried to picture Emily at 6 years old, clutching my hand as I walked her to school. At 10, scribbling a Father's Day card that read, "You're my hero, Daddy." At 20, calling from her dorm, her voice sweet and hopeful, asking for tuition money, I gladly provided. Those images once sustained me. Tonight they mocked me. I had given everything, my time, my youth, my fortune, to see her thrive. And for what? To be humiliated in front of strangers, my love treated as garbage. The necklace's image stayed with me, diamonds scattered like tears across the linen. I rose, standing before the mirror across the room. My reflection showed gray hair, lines carved deep around tired eyes. But there was a glint there, a spark I had not seen in years. It was resolve. Trevor thought he could belittle me. Emily thought she could stand silent. They were wrong. I would not be broken. I whispered into the empty room, my voice steady now. Justice will be mine, and it will be crushing. And with that, I turned away from the mirror, already thinking of the steps I would take. This night, meant to honor love, had become the beginning of something far more dangerous. Justice will be mine, and it will be crushing. In a clyde despairing the Tanley came sit of Godding, and where the place the dapt of the Connor. Back in the old Brooklyn house, the creaking floorboards whispered of a past built on sacrifice and love. The night had not loosened its grip on me since I left the ballroom. Sleep would not come. I sat surrounded by echoes of another life, where laughter had once filled these rooms, and Margaret's soft voice had made even the hardest days worth bearing. Now, silence pressed in heavy, interrupted only by the ticking of a wall clock. The memory of Trevor's sneer and Emily's silence gnawed at me like a slow burn. I could not shake the image of those diamonds scattered across the tablecloth, treated as nothing but shards of glass. This chapter of my story was no longer about ceremony or appearances. It was about remembering who I was and what I had given up, so that the betrayal I suffered that night could be measured against the weight of a lifetime. The truth was simple. I had been a man who gave everything. Tonight, I had become a man who lost nearly all. But in the stillness of my home, I would find the clarity to rise again. Brooklyn wrapped around me like an old coat, frayed but familiar. The house was modest by Manhattan standards, built of brick that had weathered decades of storms. Inside, it smelled faintly of aged wood and coffee grounds, scents that clung to the walls like memories that refused to fade. A single lamp glowed beside my armchair, casting long shadows on the worn rug. Outside, the street was quiet, only the occasional rumble of a passing car breaking the stillness. It was the kind of neighborhood where kids once rode bicycles till dusk, and neighbors traded casserole dishes through back doors. I opened the album on the coffee table, pages curling at the edges from years of use. There she was, Emily at 6 years old, her hand tucked in mine, her hair bouncing as we walked to school. Margaret had snapped that picture, her laugh echoing in the background as she teased me about my tie being crooked. I traced Emily's face with my finger. Her smile was wide, unguarded, unbroken. Another page revealed her at 10, seated at the kitchen table with markers spread before her. The Father's Day card she had made was still folded in the album pocket. "You're my hero, Daddy," she had written in uneven letters. The ink had faded, but the force of those words still struck me. I pulled the card from its slot and held it close. For years, it had been my anchor. Tonight, it was a knife. Where had that little girl gone? The years rolled forward in the album. Emily at 20, standing in her college dorm room, her eyes bright with dreams. She had called me then, her voice hurried but hopeful. "Dad, I need some help with tuition." Without hesitation, I had sold part of my investment portfolio, covering what she needed. No questions asked. I remembered telling myself it was temporary, that she would repay me not with money but with love, with presence. She promised to visit, but each time the visits grew shorter, her words sharper. And then, Trevor. A gala photo showed Emily at 28, her arm looped through his, her smile refined, polished, distant. Not the smile of the girl who once thought I was her hero, but of a woman lost in someone else's world. Calls became rarer, texts briefer. "Busy with Trevor," she would write, as though I were no longer part of her story. I told myself it was a phase, that she would come back to me. But in that ballroom, when she let Trevor mock Margaret's necklace, I knew the truth. She was gone. I pushed the album shut, the sound loud in the still house. Rising, I paced the room. The floorboards groaned under my weight, as though the house itself shared my grief. My reflection in the window showed me a man worn but not defeated. My hands were steady, though my chest ached. I had been humiliated, yes, but humiliation can be fuel. I had built my career on Wall Street with long nights and relentless drive. I had faced markets that threatened to devour me, competitors eager to see me fail, and I had survived. I realized then that this pain, sharp as it was, could be shaped into something stronger. I stood before the mirror hanging over the mantel. Gray hair framed my face, my jaw tight. The years had etched themselves into my skin, but behind my eyes flickered something Margaret had always admired: determination. "They think they can break me," I whispered to the empty room. My voice did not waver. "They are wrong." I sat again, the Father's Day card still in my hand. Carefully, I slid it into the drawer beside the chair and shut it with a click. The past was gone, and clinging to it would weaken me further. What mattered now was the present and the future. For too long, I had been a man bound by memory and forgiveness, excusing Emily's distance, overlooking Trevor's arrogance. No longer. They had crossed a line, and it was time I remembered who I was. A man who could build and dismantle empires with the flick of a pen. Resolve coursed through me like a current. I was not finished. Not by a long shot. It was time to fight back. It was time to fight back. All the little Darium. In the fortress of my Wall Street office, I no longer thought of profits but of justice. The glow of the skyline pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretching outward like a map of opportunities and betrayals. My desk, heavy oak polished to a sheen, was crowded with reports and screens, numbers dancing like fireflies across dark glass. Yet none of it mattered tonight. The markets could wait. What mattered now was the quiet, razor-sharp plan forming in my mind, fueled by the humiliation I had endured. The memory of Trevor's sneer was fresh, but sharper still was the silence of Emily, the daughter I had given my life for. That silence had buried itself deep in my chest, harder to forgive than any insult. I had built empires here, in this room. I had watched fortunes rise and collapse with the shift of a decimal point, and I had kept my ground while others fell. This office had always been my battlefield, and now it would serve as the command post for a different kind of war. The necklace still haunted me. I could see it scattered across the white tablecloth of the ballroom, the diamonds catching the light as guests stifled laughter. I clenched my fist at the memory. That gift had been the last fragment of Margaret's love, and they had treated it like trash. I swore to myself that if Trevor wanted to laugh, he would soon laugh from the ruins of his own ambition. I pulled open a drawer, lifting out a photograph of Emily from her graduation. Her smile had been genuine then, wide and unguarded. I looked at it for a long moment before sliding it back inside. Sentiment would not serve me now. Strategy would. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. "Jack," I said, when I heard the familiar gravelly voice answer. "I need information." "On Trevor Cunningham." A chuckle came from the other end. "Always straight to the point, Henry. What kind of information?" "His deals, his partners, his weaknesses," I replied. There was a pause, then Jack's voice dropped lower. "That's dangerous territory. You sure you want to stir it?" "I've never been more certain," I said. My grip tightened on the receiver until my knuckles ached. "Give me a few days," Jack said finally. "I'll find what you need." The side at an extra one. When I hung up, the silence of the office seemed sharper. I stood, walking to the window. The city sparkled below, indifferent to human heartbreaks. I pressed my hand against the cool glass, breathing slow and steady. The war had begun. The next afternoon, I met Carl, a private investigator Jack trusted, at a cafe on the Lower East Side. The place smelled of burnt coffee and damp coats. A cracked linoleum floor stretched beneath chipped tables, far from the gilded world Trevor liked to occupy. It suited me better now. Carl arrived with a worn briefcase, his fingers stained yellow from years of cigarettes. He slid into the booth across from me, his eyes sharp despite his ragged appearance. "You wanted dirt on Cunningham?" he said, his voice low. He unlatched the case with a click and turned it toward me. "Here it is, when you was feels in now. But it's public." Inside were pages of financial records, printouts of emails, photographs, all marked with red ink. I skimmed through them, my pulse quickening. There were risky investments, unreported losses, whispers of fraud. Trevor had built his empire not on stone, but on sand. Carl leaned back, lighting a cigarette. "He's overextended," he said through a stream of smoke. "One push, and the whole thing topples." I kept flipping until my eyes froze on one email. Trevor's words jumped off the page. "Don't worry, darling. Your father's money will always bail us out." My stomach twisted. Emily, my Emily, was nothing but a pawn in his game. He had no respect for her, no love for what she carried from me. He only saw her as a bridge to my fortune. I closed the folder, my jaw clenched. "This will do," I said, slipping the papers back into the briefcase. Later that week, I stood outside their Upper East Side apartment. The doorman nodded as if I were still part of their world. Inside the elevator, the hum was steady, my reflection staring back at me in polished metal doors. When they opened, I was greeted by a gilded space that felt more like a museum than a home. Marble floors, ornate mirrors, lilies arranged with surgical precision, cold. Emily greeted me with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Her hands fiddled nervously with a bracelet on her wrist. "Dad," she said, her voice too thin. Trevor lounged on a velvet sofa, whiskey in hand, his posture dripping with arrogance. "Henry," he said with mock warmth, "always a pleasure." I returned his greeting evenly, masking my intent. My eyes scanned the room until they caught on a half-open drawer beside Emily. Inside, I glimpsed the velvet box, Margaret's necklace, cast aside like a forgotten trinket. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. Trevor launched into a monologue about his newest deal, the words rolling out with practiced bravado. "Old-school finance is dead, Henry. The future belongs to men like me." I nodded, letting him talk. Each word was a shovel digging his grave. Emily excused herself to the kitchen, and I followed under the guise of offering help. She busied herself with a coffee maker, but her hands trembled. "Everything okay?" I asked softly. "I'm fine, Dad," she replied too quickly, avoiding my eyes. "Just busy." Her voice cracked on the last word. She was trapped, but she would not admit it. Back in the living room, Trevor's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening for a brief second before his mask returned. I knew then Carl's report was already pressing into his world. I left soon after, briefcase in hand, my expression calm though my insides burned. In the car, I opened the folder again, staring at the list of Trevor's investors, names I knew, men who owed me favors. My fingers traced each line. The leverage was there. That night, in the stillness of my office, I composed an email. I stripped Carl's report of any trace of its source, attaching only the evidence that mattered. I addressed it to Trevor's board of directors and top investors. My finger hovered over the mouse for a moment. Then I thought of the necklace, the look in Emily's eyes, the years of sacrifice dismissed in an instant. I clicked send. The sound was sharp, final. The email vanished into the ether, a silent missile launched into Trevor's empire. I leaned back, my heart pounding not with fear but with calm. Across town, in Trevor's sleek office, the fallout was already beginning. I imagined him sitting behind his desk, his charm faltering as his boss tossed the report onto the table. "Explain this, Cunningham." Trevor's face would flush, his words would stumble. His empire, so carefully built on arrogance, would begin to crumble. At the same moment, Emily paced their apartment, phone pressed to her ear. "You said everything was fine," she would say, her voice sharp with fear. Trevor would snap back. "It is fine, Emily. Just stay out of it." But it was not fine. And soon, she would know who had made it so. Back at my desk, I refreshed the financial news. A headline flickered across the screen. Cunningham Group faces internal review. It was small, buried deep in the business section, but it was enough. The first crack had appeared. I closed my laptop, my reflection staring back at me from the dark screen. Older, harder, but alive with purpose. I had drawn first blood, and it felt good. This was only the beginning. The restaurant's candlelight flickered across Trevor's face as he leaned in, his voice sharp with suspicion. "You've been awfully quiet, Henry. Not meddling, are you?" The question grazed me like a blade along the ribs, thin cut, small bleed, enough to sting and wake a man fully. I lifted my eyes from the water glass I had been turning by the stem and offered him a mild smile, the kind people mistake for surrender. He was hunting for confirmation, some careless word that would tell him I had stepped behind the curtain of his business and pulled a lever. I let the silence do the speaking for me, even as the memory of diamonds scattering across linen flashed in my head like a telegraph from a war I had already joined. If the wedding had been the first wound, this dinner was the bandage he meant to peel back just to watch me flinch. I knew why I was here. This night was not about the food. It was about pressure, about watching the man who had humiliated me begin to sweat under his own heat. I had come to see whether he would reveal cracks and whether Emily would still lay her hand across them to hold them shut. My goal was simple: take his measure, test his balance, and decide where to set the next stone on the scales. We were seated near the front, by a window that gave a jeweled view of Broadway taxi headlights sliding past like beads on a string, pedestrians bundled in winter coats, breath visible beneath the street lamps. Inside, the room was low-lit and reverent, voices pitched for confidences and courtships. The tablecloths were crisp white, the waiters moved like chess pieces in black suits, attentive without hovering. The place smelled of butter and thyme, of roasted meat and good wine. A string trio near the bar drew a ribbon of melody through the room, a soft thread that held everyone together with the illusion that nothing in the world could fall apart. Emily sat between us, close enough to touch either hand yet choosing neither. She had dressed with care in a navy silk dress, the color both elegant and funereal, her hair swept back to show a delicate line of neck that Margaret would have praised. She kept rearranging the silverware, as if forks and knives could form a barricade. Trevor had selected a corner banquette, the kind of seat that lets a man command a room. He had removed his suit jacket, rolled his cuffs just enough to show a watch he could not really afford, and leaned back as if gravity respected his ambition. "Old Bordeaux," he told the sommelier when the wine list came, drawing out the words, glancing at me to see if I would protest. 1998, if you have it, something that knows what it is. The sommelier nodded and melted away. Emily fussed with the linen, then forced a smile. "Dad, the duck here is wonderful," she said. "Maybe we could share it." Trevor laughed too loud for the room. "Darling, your father can order what he wants. He's an old-school steak man." "Ribeye, right, Henry?" "I will have what you recommend," I told the waiter when he appeared. "I trust people who dedicate their lives to doing a thing well." Trevor's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Compliment or criticism? He could not tell, and I let him stew in the ambiguity. Small talk lapped at the sides of the table like warm water. How the heating in their building ran too hot. How the Knicks looked decent this year. How snowmen lasted longer when packed with a little salt. I played my part with the gentle cadence men of my generation use when talking to children who have grown too fast. Meanwhile, my attention rested on the tiny tells the tap of Trevor's forefinger on the table, the way he scanned the room each time the maitre d' passed, the half-second lag before Emily answered a question, as if checking for permission she could not admit she wanted. The wine arrived. Trevor swirled, sniffed, performed the ritual with a flourish borrowed from better men, then nodded for the pour. He lifted his glass toward me. "To family," he said, a shark with a smile. "To truth," I answered, and we drank. He coasted at first, laying out his latest vision like a magician arranging scarves, an acquisition no one had heard about yet, a partnership that would turn smoke into gold. He talked about unlocking liquidity, about aggressive positioning. He peppered the table with phrases meant to dazzle a father and tether a wife. Early-stage upside, mezzanine financing, exit timing. I let him build the pedestal. The higher the pedestal, the longer the fall offers to teach a man. "Old-school finance is dying," he concluded, slanting his grin. "We innovate or we vanish. Every cycle says the same thing when it wants permission to forget the last lesson," I said, setting down my glass. "Innovation without discipline is just impatience with better marketing." Emily's fingers tightened around her napkin. Trevor's smile froze into something sharp. "And discipline is what kept you comfortable," he said, "but it won't keep you relevant." "Relevance," I said, "is determined by who is still standing when the music stops." Our salads came and went with a scatter of small remarks. I asked Emily about a non-profit showcase she had once planned to attend. She answered in short strokes, eyes sliding to Trevor as though he owned the pronouns in her sentences. The entree arrived, my steak cooked perfectly, her duck rosy at the bone, Trevor's branzino flaking under a spoon. The food was good enough to make a man think well of the world for an hour, but good food cannot fix a wrong soul. Halfway through the meal, Trevor leaned forward again, elbows on the linen, candlelight cutting little caverns under his cheekbones. "So," he said, quiet as a scalpel, "any interesting headlines lately? I've heard rumors." Makes a man wonder if someone has time on his hands, time to write letters. Emily looked up, startled. Trevor, she said softly. Can we not? It's a fair question, he said, never taking his eyes off me. My board receives anonymous reports, spurious, of course, but one must ask who benefits, or who thinks he does. I used my knife to make a calm, tidy division across the steak, then set it aside. When boards receive reports, I said, they weigh them on a scale called evidence. If the plate stays down, it means the facts have mass. He smirked. So you deny involvement. He was not seventh place. Cannibal. I deny the premise, I said. I also deny dessert if it is that molten chocolate cake you always order and never finish. A couple at the next table hid smiles behind their water glasses. Trevor's ears colored. He raised his wine and emptied the glass, then refilled it immediately, a small hurry in the motion. Emily's voice finally found a narrow road between us. Dad, she said, Trevor is under pressure. Things at work well. It is not the time for jabs. Thank you, subscribes. I have that seat. It is the time for honesty, I said, meeting her eyes. Honesty is not cruelty. It is mercy in advance. She held my gaze for a heartbeat, and I saw the frightened child she once was, stranded inside the practiced adult. Then she looked down again, defeated by a habit of loyalty that had not earned its keep. Trevor set his glass down, hard enough to rattle the silver. You play the saint, he said, voice rising a notch. But we all know your game. Control, leverage, favors. You pretend to be above it, but you built your fortune the same way every man does, by squeezing someone who cannot push back. I took a breath that tasted of thyme and old oak, and let his accusation rest on the cloth between us like a fish flopping after the hook is pulled. When a contractor builds a bridge, I said, he calculates load. He anchors the span to bedrock because weather is not a personality trait, it is a fact. I have managed risk my entire life by honoring facts. The men I dealt with respected that. The ones who did not well, they did not last to complain. Are you saying I will not last? He said, leaning in so close I could see a thread loose on his cuff. I am saying weather exists, I replied. He laughed once, a sound without joy. You smug old. He bit off the word when the waiter appeared to ask about coffee. Black, I said. Strong. Same, Emily murmured. Cappuccino, Trevor snapped. And bring the check. The waiter retreated. A slow hush traveled our corner of the room. People sense when a storm gathers, even if they do not know the forecast. I watched a couple at the bar pretend to examine the menu again, watched an older man in a tweed jacket adjust his hearing aid, as if to confirm whether this was entertainment or danger. In a different life, on a Sunday afternoon, I might have been at home with a football game on low volume, a pot roast resting, a neighbor dropping by to borrow a ladder, the domestic tapestry of American life that steadies a man. Yet here we were in a theater of manners, performing at the edge of an argument that had been a long time coming. Trevor slid his phone from his pocket and placed it face up on the table like a weapon. Numbers glowed, messages racing in, a board member's name blinking and vanishing, an investor's subject line flagged in red. He did not mute it. He wanted me to hear the evidence of his importance. The phone buzzed again. He stared at it, color draining. I saw the tremor in his jaw. Emily reached out and brushed his sleeve with her fingertips. Let it wait, she whispered. It does not wait, he said, eyes still on me. Not for him. Trevor, she said, a fragile plea that made something cold move through me. I laid my fork down with care, every motion deliberate. I asked you, once, to respect Margaret's memory, I said. You mocked it in front of 100 people. That told me all I needed to know about what you think sacred. A man who laughs at grief will bargain with anything. His chair scraped. Do not talk to me about sacred. You buy loyalty and call it love. You dangle apartments and call it generosity. You think money is redemption. Money is a tool, I said. Character is the hand that holds it. Coffee arrived, fragrant as a December morning. The waiter set a sugar caddy down. Trevor reached for it and spilled 2 packets, granules scattering like sleet. He cursed under his breath. The small clumsiness undid him more than any argument could. He snatched his phone, read a message, cursed again louder. Heads turned. The string trio faltered for a beat. What did they say? Emily asked, barely audible. Nothing I did not expect, he said, but his voice cracked on the last word. He slapped the phone back down. This is ridiculous, he announced to no one and everyone. I do not have to sit here and be slandered by a has-been. The word hung there, ugly and young. I did not look around to measure the room's reaction. I watched my daughter instead. Her eyes had gone wide, shiny with shame, that belonged to all three of us in different measures. I kept my voice low. The only people who use the term has been are those who fear they are a never was. He surged forward, hands flat on the table. Are you saying? I am saying lower your voice, I said. I will not be told what to do by you or anyone, he flared, and the final word rose enough to make the chandeliers ring. Conversations froze. A waiter, poor boy, hovered a step from our table and decided to keep going rather than be caught in the gravity well. Emily reached for Trevor's wrist. Please, she begged, the syllable a bridge sagging under too much weight. People are watching. It will become an entente. They should, he snapped, sweeping an arm toward the room. They should see the way this man plays the martyr. I felt something in me settle, like a coin finally finding the bottom of a deep glass. The lesson had taught itself. There was nothing here to salvage. I lifted my napkin and folded it with the unhurried precision of an accountant balancing a final ledger. I set it on the cloth and rose. Sit down, Trevor said, voice husky, trying on authority that did not fit. I have finished my meal, I said, and my time here. He laughed, but it sounded like a cough. So you run. That figures. Staying, I replied, is not the same as standing. I glanced to Emily. You know where to find me when you want to tell the truth, I said. Not a command, not even a request. Just a statement of geography and time, like listing a street address and the hour after sundown when the porch light clicks on. She nodded, a brittle motion that cracked my heart in places I had already braced, and still the hurt leaked through. I reached for my coat. The waiter returned with the check, setting it down in the center like a white flag. I put my card on it. Trevor grabbed for it with a quick, angry hand, but I was faster by a breath and a lifetime. Let me, I said. I asked for the meeting. That is right, he said, eyes glittering. Pay for the spectacle you staged. For he's better. It staged itself, I said, slipping the receipt back into the folder without looking at the total. Men like Trevor keep score with other people's numbers. Men like me stopped needing to a long time ago. When I turned, I felt the room's attention as a temperature shift on skin. I buttoned my coat, lifted my scarf from the chair, and placed a tip that reflected not only the service, but the collateral damage of working near other people's storms. Then I looked once, only once, at the two of them together, him bristling behind his performance. Her small as a note folded too many times, and I walked out. At the door, the maitre d' offered the neutral courtesy of men who have seen everything and must pretend it is nothing. Outside, winter bit my face clean. Cabs slid along the curb, their tires whispering on damp asphalt. I used to love the walk from a good dinner to a waiting night, hands in pockets, breath like smoke, the city making its old promises that you could begin again tomorrow. Tonight, the promises felt sharper. They had edges I could use. I stood beneath the awning for a moment, feeling the cafe warmth shrink at my back, and the city's honest cold take me in. The air tasted like metal. I could still hear Trevor's last flare of voice, the room's intake of breath, the soft scrape of Emily's chair as she followed the sound rather than the sense. Quietly, I thanked the night for showing me plainly what daylight had let me doubt. I turned up the collar of my coat and stepped off the curb toward a cab. The driver rolled the window down. "Where to, sir?" he asked. "Brooklyn," I said, "and take the bridge." I wanted the view, the architecture of endurance, the span that held despite winter and weather, and the clamor of men who mistake volume for strength. As we merged into traffic, the restaurant's glow receded in the side mirror, a small, warm lie shrinking to a dot. The skyline opened like a ledger across the windshield. I do not know if it was the angle or the hour, but the city looked less like a crown and more like a set of tools laid neatly in a box. Each one had a purpose. Each one could do work. I measured, for a few quiet minutes, the work left to do. There would be another call to an investor who had not yet answered, a document to draft that would travel faster than rumor, a conversation with an old friend who preferred to keep his name out of print, but not out of influence. There would be mercy, too, meted out where it belonged, not to men who mocked grief, but to women who needed safe doors, and young people who needed tuition more than applause. The plan did not feel like revenge then. It felt like repair. Halfway across the bridge, the driver glanced up in the rear view. "You all right back there?" he asked, The ordinary kindness of a man whose living is to carry strangers from one chapter to the next. I am, I said, and the truth surprised me with its steadiness. He nodded and turned the radio down to a murmur jazz, something brushed with cymbals. I watched the river fold itself around the pilings and thought about the kind of load a span can bear if the engineer respects the math. The math was clear now. The variables had all been identified. Pressure applied in the right places yields predictable outcomes. The cab eased onto the Brooklyn side. Streetlights stitched bright ovals on wet pavement. The driver pulled to the curb in front of my house. I handed him the fare and a tip that changed the shape of his smile. "Have a good night, sir," he said. "I intend to," I answered, pushing the door open to the honest cold. I climbed the steps, the old wood answering under my feet with sounds I trusted. At the top, I paused with the key in the lock and let the quiet of the block settle around me, the kind of silence that hears a distant television through a neighbor's window, the faint clink of dishes, the slow turn of a dog's collar tag as it circles its bed. This was the country I knew, the daily America that does not appear in headlines. Porch lights, leftovers, a clean mug set beside the sink for morning coffee. It steadied me more than any speech could. I slipped inside, set my coat on the hook, and stood in the entryway where Margaret once kissed my cheek as I came home late. I could almost hear her say, in that plain way she had, that justice is a house you build on level ground, plank by plank, without hurry and without apology. I moved to the desk, opened a leather notebook, and wrote 2 names with phone numbers beside them. Then I closed the book and placed it dead center on the blotter, as a craftsman lays the tool he will pick up first at daybreak. I turned off the lamp. The room went to a soft blue, the kind of darkness that promises a clean morning. As I stood there, I understood that restraint is not weakness. Restraint is the hand you put on the brake at the top of the hill, because you know exactly how far the road runs and exactly when to let gravity help. I stepped back to the door, opened it once more just to feel the night air on my face, and I let a single sentence move through me with the calm of a verdict already written. They've pushed me too far. Now they'll learn the cost. Trevor's office, once a temple of power, was now a battlefield of crumpled reports and unanswered calls. I had seen boardrooms like his 1,000 times before. Mahogany desks polished within an inch of their lives, stock tickers glowing across multiple screens, a skyline backdrop meant to remind everyone who entered that they were in the presence of a man who commanded empires. But that morning, when word reached me that Cunningham's investors were pulling out one by one, I knew the gloss on his empire was already cracking. An office like that is built to intimidate, to project permanence. Yet permanence is a lie. Markets teach that every empire is a sandcastle, one good tide away from collapse. And Trevor's tide had come in fast. I sat in my own office on Wall Street, calmer than I had been in weeks, sipping black coffee from a heavy ceramic mug while reading the reports that landed on my desk. The headlines whispered at first. Concerns over Cunningham Group stability. By noon, the whispers had turned into a chorus. My phone buzzed with confirmations Ellison and 2 other investors had walked away. They had been cautious men for decades, and cautious men only leap when they are certain the ground behind them is already on fire. I thought back to the card Emily had made as a child, the one where she scribbled, "You're my hero, Daddy." That image had flashed across my mind more than once over the past few days, both warming and wounding me. Now, as I pictured her standing in that marble apartment with Trevor, watching their status slip away, I realized that she was about to understand the real cost of choosing silence when it mattered most. The setting of this chapter was twofold. One man's office unraveling in chaos, and another's home turned fortress of calm purpose. The juxtaposition was not lost on me. Trevor shouted into phones while I quietly signed documents. He broke things while I built. Emily called me once that week, her number glowing on my phone. I let it ring until the screen went dark. She wanted reassurance, a safety net. I could hear her voice even without answering. "Dad, it's just a rough patch. Trevor will fix it. Can you help us?" But my silence was the truest response. Some lessons can only be learned through absence. Carl called later that day. "He's drowning," he said, his voice almost amused. "Yelling at staff, throwing things. I've got people saying he's pacing his office at 3 in the morning, making calls to anyone who'll still pick up. The man's a mess." I leaned back in my chair, gazing out over Manhattan. "Good," I said simply. Across town, in the penthouse apartment, Emily's world was beginning to collapse in real time. The marble walls no longer gleamed. The flowers wilted in their vases because no one remembered to replace them. Boxes half-packed with clothes littered the living room as Trevor scrambled to hide the fact that creditors were circling. Emily called friends, but many had already stepped back, unwilling to associate with a family slipping down the ladder. "Trevor, you said we were safe," she cried one evening, her voice cracking. I imagined her standing in the kitchen, that sterile place of chrome and polish that had never smelled like home. "You told me everything was solid. It's not now." Trevor spun on her, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot. "Do you think I can control the market? Do you think I can stop people from panicking? They're rats, Emily. All of them. They scatter at the first sign of smoke." Her hands trembled as she gripped the counter. "But you lied to me. You told me not to worry. You told me—" "I told you what you needed to hear," he snapped. His glass hit the counter, whiskey sloshing onto the marble. Emily froze, seeing him for the first time not as the charmer who had swept her into a world of glittering parties and bold promises, but as a man built on bluster, ready to collapse without a hand to steady him. Meanwhile, I visited a notary's office, a small, cramped space in Midtown filled with the scent of paper and ink. A wiry woman with sharp eyes slid the final document toward me. "This transfers the Upper East Side apartment to the charitable trust you've established," she said, her voice brisk. I nodded, signing my name with one deliberate stroke. The scratch of the pen sounded like the closing of a door. Margaret's name would live on in that foundation, supporting shelters for women, scholarships for young people with no safety nets. That apartment, meant as a wedding gift, had become a symbol of justice instead. As I signed, I thought of Emily's face when she would open the letter and realize the home she had expected was gone, transformed into something she could never touch. My chest ached at the thought, but I steadied myself. She needed to feel the loss, needed to understand that her silence at the wedding had not been without cost. That afternoon, I returned to my office. An email from Ellison waited in my inbox. "We've withdrawn from Cunningham's deal. Couldn't justify the risk." I read it twice, savoring each word. Trevor's empire was unraveling thread by thread, and I was holding the shears. On the other side of the city, Trevor's meltdown accelerated. In his office, the once pristine desk was buried under scattered reports and broken pens. His laptop glowed with angry emails from investors demanding explanations. His boss, Harrove, called him into a meeting and threw Carl's report onto the desk. "Explain this, Cunningham," he barked. Trevor stammered, sweat gathering at his collar. "It's nonsense, a smear job, I can fix this." "You've been reckless," Harrove cut him off. "You're terminated, effective immediately. Get out." Trevor stumbled from the building, his career shattered. By the time he returned to the penthouse, Emily was waiting, clutching the letter I had sent. Her hands shook as she held it out to him. "It's gone," she whispered. Her eyes were red, her face pale. "The apartment Dad sold it. He gave it to charity. Everything's gone." Trevor ripped the letter from her hands, his face twisting with rage. "Your father," he spat. "He's been behind this all along." Emily's voice cracked as tears spilled. "No, Trevor. This is your fault. You pushed him too far." He turned away, silent, his shoulders sagging under the weight of defeat. I sat in my Brooklyn home that evening, the lamp casting a warm circle of light around me. My tablet glowed with the headline I had been waiting for: "Cunningham Group Collapses Amid Investor Exodus." I read it twice, then set the device down. The victory was sharp, but it cut both ways. Emily was suffering too, and part of me ached for her. But justice demanded balance. I had given her everything. She had chosen silence. Now she would feel the consequence. Outside, the street was quiet, the kind of suburban calm that masks the storms raging behind closed doors. I rose and walked to the window, gazing at the faint glow of Manhattan in the distance. Trevor had fallen. Emily had begun to see the cost of her choices, yet I knew the final chapter had not yet been written. The phone buzzed on the table. A text from Carl. "He's finished. Completely finished." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Justice was working its way through. But as I gathered my coat to step outside for air, one question lingered in my mind like a shadow I could not shake. How far was I willing to go to see this through? The answer would come soon enough. Emily whispered through tears, "This is your fault, Trevor. You pushed him too far." The doorbell rang in the quiet Brooklyn evening, and when I opened it, Emily and Trevor stood broken on the stoop. I had known it was only a matter of time. Word had spread quickly of Trevor's fall. The collapse of his company was splashed across the financial pages. investors whispering over coffee about his arrogance finally meeting its due. I imagined his name passing from one set of lips to another, each recounting of his downfall tinged with either satisfaction or disbelief. Yet none of that noise mattered compared to the sound of that chime echoing through my house. For months, my home had been a place of solitude, a fortress where I had rebuilt my resolve. Now it became a stage for a confrontation I had long prepared for. This chapter's goal was different from the ones before it. No longer was it about exposing Trevor or dismantling his empire. That was already done. Now it was about reckoning with my daughter's choices, with the cost of betrayal, with my own need to decide whether justice had to mean distance forever. The house smelled faintly of old wood and coffee grounds, as it always did, and the lamplight gave the living room its familiar warm glow. Outside, the evening was settling heavy over the block, the kind of Brooklyn quiet where porch lights glowed like beacons and the faint chatter of televisions seeped through thin windows. Ordinary life went on, unaware of the storm at my doorstep. Trevor's face was gaunt, his suit rumpled, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. His tie hung loose, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only raw anger and desperation. Emily clung to his arm, her eyes red from crying, her clothes too fine for the disheveled way she wore them. She looked at me as if searching for the father she had once run to without hesitation, the father who had carried her when she scraped her knee, the father she had betrayed with silence in the ballroom. "Henry," Trevor started, his voice lacking its usual venom, replaced instead by something I had never expected to hear pleading. "We need to talk." Emily's grip on his arm tightened. She looked at me with a sob caught in her throat. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she whispered. Tears streaked her cheeks, leaving faint lines in her makeup. "I didn't mean for any of this. Please, please don't turn us away." I stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. The air in the living room grew heavier the moment they crossed the threshold. They stood awkwardly in the center of the room, like intruders who knew they were not welcome. I gestured to the couch, but they remained standing, shifting like cornered animals. Trevor spoke first, his voice trembling with frustration. "We've lost everything. The apartment, my job, our savings gone." He forced a smile, though it looked more like a grimace. "You've got the means, Henry. Help us, please. We have discreeter his of God." His words carried the tone of entitlement even now, as if I owed him salvation simply because I could provide it. My arms folded across my chest, and I said nothing. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the hum of the old radiator. Emily stepped forward, her knees buckling as she sank to the floor before me. Her hands trembled as she clutched the hem of my trousers. "Dad, I'm sorry," she cried. "I should have stood up for you, for Mom's necklace. I should have defended you. Please, I know I've made mistakes, but don't leave us like this." Her sobs echoed through the room, cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little girl she had once been, clutching my hand with wide eyes, believing I could fix anything. But layered over that was the woman who had chosen Trevor's arrogance over my love, who had stayed silent when my wife's memory was mocked. I straightened, forcing my voice to remain steady. "You made your choices, both of you." Trevor mocked what mattered most. "You, Emily, stood by and let him. You let him throw Margaret's necklace onto the table like it was garbage, and you said nothing." Emily's head dropped, her shoulders shaking as sobs racked her body. Trevor's face twisted in a mix of anger and defeat. He opened his mouth to argue, but I raised a hand, silencing him before he could start. "No more excuses," I said firmly. "You built this ruin. Now live in it. Thank you for watching, but it's not reconnectip." The words fell heavy in the air, final and immovable. I turned toward the door, pulling it open. The night air rushed in, cool and sharp, as if the world itself were eager to wash away the staleness of their presence. "Leave," I said quietly but firmly. Trevor's jaw clenched, his pride still fighting to surface, but he took Emily's arm and guided her toward the door. She looked back at me, her eyes wide and pleading, but I held firm. The door closed behind them with a soft thud that reverberated in my chest. I stood in the silence of the living room, the lamp casting its halo on the worn rug. My chest ached with the weight of what I had just done, but I knew it was necessary. Some wounds only heal when you stop reopening them. The following morning, I was back in my office on Wall Street. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls, warming the polished oak desk. The lawyer sat across from me, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She slid a pen across the desk. "This establishes the Margaret Wilson Foundation," she said briskly. Your donation will fund shelters and scholarships for years to come. I signed each page, the scratch of the pen a steady rhythm. Millions carved from my fortune, money I had once dreamed of passing to Emily. Now it would honor Margaret instead, turning pain into something enduring. Margaret would be proud, the lawyer said softly as she gathered the papers. I glanced at the photo frame on my desk, Margaret and Emily laughing in the garden years ago. My thumb brushed the glass, lingering on Margaret's smile. She would, I murmured, more to myself than to her. That afternoon, I left the office and drove to the cemetery. The sky was overcast, clouds heavy with the promise of rain. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. I walked slowly between rows of stone, each name a reminder of how fleeting life is, until I reached Margaret's grave. Kneeling, I traced her name, etched into the granite. The replica of her necklace rested in my palm, diamonds catching what little light the day offered. I had it made after the wedding, not as a replacement but as a reminder. The original was gone, lost in Emily's indifference. This one was for me, a token of closure. Margaret, I whispered, my voice steady though my chest ached. I did it. I protected what we had. Trevor's empire is gone. Emily, she's learning, but it's not enough. I hope I made you proud. I set the necklace on the grave, its stones glinting against the gray stone. It was a farewell, not to her memory, but to the anger I had carried. The act was simple, but it freed something deep within me. I stood, my gaze lingering on the headstone. The years we had shared, our laughter, our quiet nights remained untouched by the chaos of the past months. That was my true victory. In my coat pocket, I felt the envelope Emily had sent me days earlier, her handwriting delicate, the paper creased. I had not opened it, unwilling to let her words sway me again. I pulled it out, studied it for a moment, then slipped it back. I did not need her apologies. Some things cannot be undone. Turning, I walked down the path, gravel crunching underfoot, each step lighter than the last. The cemetery faded behind me, its silence giving way to the hum of the city in the distance. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Justice had been served. Margaret's love would live on through the foundation, untouched by Trevor's greed or Emily's betrayal. My story was not one of cruelty, but of purpose, of dignity restored. As I reached the cemetery gates, a sliver of blue broke through the clouds. Life was just beginning again, and I was ready to step forward into it. Life's just beginning, I thought, the words unvoiced but certain. I sit now in the quiet of my Brooklyn home, the lamp glowing softly against the worn rug, and I finally feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. For so long I carried a storm inside me, a storm born of love betrayed, silence unbroken, and dignity mocked. I carried it into the night of the ballroom, when Trevor sneered at Margaret's necklace and Emily let the silence stretch like a canyon between us. I carried it home, where the walls of this house heard my anger, my grief, and then my resolve. But as I look back now, I see not only the pain, but the path that led me here. I think about how easily a man can forget his own worth when he spends his life giving everything for others. I spent decades working late nights, chasing deals, building a fortune not for myself but for my daughter. I traded sleep and years of peace so she could live with opportunity. Yet in one moment it felt like all of it had been cast aside. That pain nearly broke me, but it also shaped me. It forced me to remember that sacrifice is noble, but self-respect must never be surrendered. I remember the photographs in the old album. Emily at 6, smiling wide with a missing tooth. Emily at 10, scribbling, "You're my hero, Daddy," on a card that still sits folded in a drawer. Emily at 20, calling from her dorm, her voice bright with dreams I was so proud to fund. I hold on to those images because they remind me of the girl I raised before Trevor's shadow fell across her. Those memories are bittersweet, but they remind me that love cannot be erased, even when loyalty falters. Trevor thought his arrogance was armor. He thought his laughter could cover disrespect, that his ambition could make him untouchable. But life is not built on arrogance. It is built on truth. I used the very skills I had honed over years on Wall Street, the patience to study numbers, the instinct to find cracks in empires, the precision to strike at the right moment to remind him of that truth. He believed he could mock grief and build an empire on sand, but every sandcastle eventually meets the tide. The apartment I once intended as a gift became something else entirely. It became a lesson. Instead of fueling their entitlement, it became the seed of the Margaret Wilson Foundation, a living legacy that will help people who truly need it. Shelters will open, scholarships will be given, and my wife's name will not be remembered for the night Trevor sneered at her necklace, but for the hope her memory now offers others. That choice gave me peace, because it reminded me that wealth, when used with purpose, outlives greed. When Emily fell to her knees in my living room, begging me not to turn her away, I saw both the child I had loved and the woman who had betrayed my silence. It tore at me, but I knew then that true love sometimes means letting others face the consequences of their choices. To shield her again would have been to betray myself. To forgive too quickly would have taught her nothing. I will always love my daughter, but love does not mean blindness. Love demands truth. When I walked away from Margaret's grave, leaving the replica necklace glinting on the stone, I felt something inside me finally let go. I let go of the anger. I let go of the humiliation. I let go of the need to prove myself to anyone else. What remained was calm, a steady rhythm like the tide against the shore. For the first time in years, I felt whole again. Life will always test us, sometimes through strangers, sometimes through those we hold dearest. It will strip us down to our rawest moments, force us to choose between surrender and resolve. And though betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from family, so too does justice feel fuller when we reclaim our dignity with our own hands. I have learned that family is not defined solely by blood. Family is defined by love, by loyalty, by respect. It is defined by the daughter who once held my hand with faith, and perhaps one day it will be defined by her learning that silence has consequences. The true meaning of family is not perfection, but integrity. Without respect, without defense of what is sacred, family is just a word. I have also learned that self-worth is not a gift others can grant. It is a foundation I had forgotten I was standing on. I gave and gave until I believed my value came only from what I provided. But my value was never in the money, or the gifts, or even the sacrifices. It was in the man I had become through those sacrifices. It was in my dignity, my resolve, my unwillingness to let anyone trample on Margaret's memory or the years I gave for Emily's future. And I have learned that greed and betrayal carry their own inevitable consequences. Trevor thought he could cheat life with swagger and charm, but arrogance always collapses. Emily thought silence would protect her, but silence is a choice, and choices carry weight. They both learned that love and loyalty, once squandered, are not easily recovered. Now, as I sit here in the evening quiet, I feel a peace I once thought I would never find again. Justice was not just about tearing down Trevor's empire. Justice was about reminding myself that my dignity is not negotiable, that my love is not to be mocked, that my sacrifices meant something even if others forgot them. The stars outside the window are faint tonight, but they are steady. I take comfort in their steadiness, the way they remind me that some things endure even through darkness. My life is not over. In many ways, it is only beginning again. Margaret's name will live on in the foundation. My dignity has been restored. My peace has been reclaimed. And though I do not know if Emily will ever truly come back to me, I know that if she does, it will have to be on the foundation of truth, not silence. Until then, I will carry her in my heart, but I will no longer carry her choices as my burden. This is my story, a story of sacrifice, betrayal, revenge, and finally, restoration. It is a story that proves no matter how much we give, we must never give away our self-respect. It is a story that reminds us that greed devours itself, while integrity builds something that endures. It is a story that shows justice may be delayed, but it will always find its moment. And so I close this chapter of my life not with bitterness, but with peace. I will wake tomorrow, pour my coffee, walk through this house filled with memories, and know that I stood tall when it mattered most. That, above all, is victory.